A few more made shots would have won Missouri the game, but the defense against Arkansas, that was the problem to me.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And later in the program, I think we can finally put this whole Kellen Moore discussion to bed at this point, though Missouri's not going to officially do it, so we'll just unofficially do it coming up here on the podcast. But you know what? I do want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with FanDuel if your first $5 bet wins. And Missouri with just a classic letdown game, quite honestly, against Arkansas yesterday. And I'm not going to say that Missouri didn't want the game or anything like that. It just seemed like Arkansas, who is right on the bubble of the NCAA tournament, it would seem, well, maybe wanted it just a little bit more. Now, big picture, I'm not going to make giant sweeping negative thoughts on this game for the most part. But if you're disappointed, I don't blame you, because quite simply, Missouri's defense yesterday, it just wasn't good enough. And after leading by 7 at halftime, to lose the second half by 18 points in that ball game, 51-33, Arkansas topped Missouri in that second half. I don't blame you if you're disappointed with that. Though I will say, playing defense is pretty difficult when you commit 26 fouls and your opponent gets up 37 free throws in the ball game. Another not exactly great night for SEC officiating, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the game on the officials. I'm just simply saying, at this point, I'm just used to the officiating being horrible, being ghastly both ways, and it's just something you're going to have to put up with. That in endless replay reviews the last couple minutes of a close game. But something I don't want to keep up with and just accept for the rest of the season is just bad transition defense. It felt like every time Arkansas had the ball in a fast break, Missouri would basically allow them to get a layup. The Tigers were so concerned with guarding the three-point line that they would allow the lane to open up like the Red Sea for the Razorbacks. And while I understand Dennis Gates' infatuation with the three-point shot, analytically, I understand why 90% of players plus, why it makes more sense for them to shoot a three-pointer than it does a long two. But let's not forget that the best shot in basketball, statistically, is still a dunk, a shot right at the freaking rim. Do you remember, hey, I talked about how Missouri played such spectacular offensive basketball in the previous game against Alabama. Well, they averaged about 1.4 points per possession. That's an elite number. Well, if you're dunking the ball, what's your average points per possession? About 2. 2 is really, really good, and it's bigger than 1.4. We'll go 1.9 for the occasional missed dunk on occasion. But my point here is that in transition, not only was Missouri bad defensively, frankly, they were bad offensively in transition as well, highlighted by a comically bad Caleb Grill 2-on-1 fast break where he couldn't decide if he wanted to pass it or pull up, and he just ends up tripping over the ball and falling over on his face, basically. Now, it's just one play. I'm like, what are you going to do? It's one of those just, you laugh and move on to the next play, that type of deal. But in a bigger picture, I do have to say I'm constantly amazed at how bad modern basketball players are at running a simple 2-on-1 fast break. I don't know, spread out and get about the same distance apart. Not only, I mean down the court, because so often you see these 2-on-1s where the guy who has the ball, well, the person who's supposed to be basically next to him fundamentally is 10, 15 feet down the court. So unless you can throw a lob to that guy, really what you're doing is you're allowing the defender to get between you and the basket and your teammate. You're allowing that defender to cover a lot more ground than he really should. So anyway, that whole 2-on-1 thing, just one of my big bugaboos, that as great as modern basketball players are in so many ways, how can you not just complete a 2-on-1 and get a foul and 2 free throws at the very least? But I will say this, a lot of Missouri fans have been saying that, well, it's the pace. If Missouri is in a fast-paced game like they were against Alabama, they can beat just about anybody. In fact, John Pinckney said this. My friend Blake said this. Listener John here says Tigers can win fast-paced against anyone. The sludge factor, example, Texas and Texas A&M, is what will kill them in the end. And I will say, in a game where Zonomir Avicic really dominated the paint for Arkansas, it did feel like a game where Josh Gray really would have come in handy, for sure. Though I will say this, in the first game against Arkansas, where Missouri rolled in Mizzou Arena, Gray only played 4 minutes to the tune of 0 points and 0 rebounds against the Razorbacks. So he was completely invisible in terms of impact in that ball game. So to just put it all on, well, we missed Josh Gray, that's probably a little bit of an over-analysis there. And also, I would just say that, but I will say on the other side, though, it did feel like, hey, every game is unique. I'll say that. It really did feel like a game where Avicic was playing incredibly well, dominating the rim. It just felt like we got one more little bit of physicality there. The most physical player that we have on the team would have made a difference, at least his presence. But again, I don't know that that was the biggest problem of all, again, considering that Gray was a non-factor the first time around against the Razorbacks. And coming up, more on this game and also a quick Kirby Moore update as promised. But first, today's episode, yes, is brought to you by FanDuel. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no place to get in on it than at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Live bets throughout every game available. Even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can still get in on the fourth quarter action. I absolutely love that feature because it does keep you in on the game. You're always looking for angles. That's the beauty of it. Right now, new customers at FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Now, unlike last offseason, I don't think you're going to be hearing any social media or press releases or anything like that about, hey, Kirby Moore, the Missouri OC, he's coming back next season, everybody. But we did get official word from the New Orleans Saints that they are hiring Kellen Moore, Kirby's older brother, the new coach of the New Orleans Saints, hiring Doug Nussmeier as his next offensive coordinator. Doug Nussmeier, actually the father of LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier, by the way. So he'll be fairly close to Baton Rouge, able to see his son play some home games there, it would seem. Makes sense for him, and I think it makes a lot of sense for Kellen Moore, too. And it turns out I think my original analysis of this situation was pretty spot on, although I did waver and waffle a little bit on it after it seemed like Kellen Moore had made some kind of cryptic comments about Kirby. But it turns out my original analysis, hey, if you're Kellen Moore, do you really want to hire, even though, hey, he's your brother, he's your little brother, guy with no coaching experience in the NFL, still in his early mid-30s, no experience in the NFL. And by the way, he was going to cost money for the Saints too, set to make $1.3 million with the Tigers this season. You need to pay him what, $1.5–2 million bucks? That's a lot of money. That's top 10 type money for an offensive coordinator in the NFL. I just didn't see the family-owned New Orleans Saints making that move. And again, getting Doug Nussmeier, a more veteran-minded type of guy for Kellen Moore, who also is himself still in his 30s, a young guy in his own right, makes all the sense in the world to me. So again, you're not going to hear any official word from Missouri or Kirby Moore or anybody saying, hey guys, I'm coming back, because, well, the only one who was really talking about this, I guess, was me for the most part, and your message boards out there. So regardless, I think we can at this point put the Kirby Moore situation to bed. Looks very much like he's obviously going to be Missouri's offensive coordinator next season. So I've mentioned in the past how a couple sophomores for Missouri, Anthony Robinson and Trent Pierce, well, when they play well, Missouri is almost impossible for most teams to beat. Well, Pierce and Ant weren't nearly as good as we would like last night. Pierce knocked down 3 in the ball game, but I believe he had 4 turnovers. Let me see. Let me make sure that's correct. Actually had no turnovers. 4 fouls in 16 minutes. I knew there was something there with the number 4 that stood out. But Pierce wasn't great. Robinson wasn't great. And I thought changing up the starting lineup in the second half made a lot of sense. Now, there's been some talk of, hey, should Missouri change up its starting 5 for this reason or that reason, according to some fans. In my opinion, I'm less worried about who starts the game. I think it makes more sense to change up the starting 5 at halftime, because, well, at the start of the game, you're kind of trying to figure out who's got it tonight, who's feeling it, who's got the energy, who's got their shot hitting, all that kind of good stuff. Again, you start Marquez Warwick, for example, in the second half because he played great offensive basketball in the first half. So why not keep him out there? Why not keep Jacob Cruz out there, as Missouri did to start the second half? I like it in theory. Unfortunately, just like the beginning of the first half, well, the beginning of the second half was not good for Missouri. The Tigers get off to bad starts in both halves, and really, in a game where you lose by 7, that was as important as anything. And also, frankly, again, the defense was not good enough. Just not only was the transition defense bad for Missouri, but simply just too much reaching and too much fouling by Missouri. It can't be all on the officials, and I didn't love how they called the game, but at a certain point, you've got to adjust. Missouri, with multiple guys with 3+ fouls. In fact, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys from Missouri had 3+ fouls in that game, including Peyton Marshall, who came in for 4 minutes and committed 4 fouls. Listen, you guys know I love Peyton Marshall and his potential here at Missouri. But right now, as a true freshman, I just don't think you can put him out there right now. Defensively, he's a real problem for Missouri. He's simply, I just think in ball screens, you've got to hunt him every single time if you're the opposition, because you're probably going to get a good shot or a foul by Marshall at the very least. I hate to say it, that's the way I feel about it right now. Still like his future for Missouri, and similar to Marcus Allen too, and really any of these freshmen. I like their future, but right now I can't trust them in an important basketball game, unfortunately. So bottom line, well, this was a disappointing loss. I don't want to overanalyze it too much. The defense was a little bit concerning. The offense, though, not really, to me, for the most part. If Caleb Grill, who goes 2 of 12 from the three-point line in the game, more often than not, he's gonna knock down 2 or 3 more of those, and you're talking about a possible Missouri victory, or certainly a more competitive game in that case. And some great shots for Grill down the stretch that he just couldn't quite knock down. Also, for some more context, too, I know this is gonna be cold comfort for Missouri fans, but it is some context. Yesterday on the SEC, only Tennessee and Florida, 2 of the best teams in the country, were able to win on the road, and all the other teams in the conference, including some ranked teams like Mississippi State, went down on the road as well. So again, I understand this is cold comfort for Missouri fans, but just some context that life on the road in conference, especially in this conference in 2025, is not easy for anybody whatsoever. So, with all that being said, hopefully we'll have some more fun stuff to talk about here on Locked On Mizzou in the coming days, and I will see you Monday coming up on this program. And also, don't forget to check out Locked On College Basketball. Find it on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. So until then, I'm John Miller, and this has been Locked On Mizzou.